He thought he had it all under control: private servers, encrypted chats, off-the-record calls. Kash Patel walked into that congressional hearing like a man untouchable, certain that no one, not even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, could trace what he'd buried months ago. But what he didn't know was that she had the receipts. One line, one email, one audio clip he never meant anyone to hear. And as Patel smirked under the lights, leaning back in his chair with that trademark confidence, AOC leaned forward and whispered the words that changed everything. The room froze. The cameras kept rolling, and the mic, the one he thought was off, was still recording. This story is a dramatized retelling inspired by real tensions and real power dynamics inside the halls of American democracy. While the characters and events have been fictionalized for narrative impact, the questions they raise and the emotions they evoke are deeply real. Because sometimes the line between fiction and truth isn't what was said, but what someone hoped you'd never hear. Washington, D.C. woke up gray that morning. Not the soft kind of gray that makes the city feel poetic, but the kind that weighs heavy on concrete, that presses down on shoulders like unfinished business. A fine drizzle fell without sound, slicking the pavement outside the Rayburn House office building as staffers in navy coats and sensible shoes hurried past puddles without looking up. Even the flag atop the Capitol dome seemed to droop, its edges wet and unmoved. Inside room 2141, the air was colder than usual, not in temperature, but in energy. C-SPAN cameras stood still, red lights blinking silently as technicians adjusted focus. Staffers whispered behind folders. A few congressional aides scrolled their phones absently, waiting for what everyone assumed would be a routine proceeding. No fireworks, no headlines. Just another oversight hearing tucked between coffee breaks and flight check-ins. At 8:52 a.m., Kash Patel entered, jacket tailored, shoes polished to an aggressive shine. He moved like a man who had rehearsed his stride. His attorney followed closely, younger, sharper, in a dark suit that said, "I've billed more hours than you've lived." They shared a quiet laugh as they reached the witness table, their voices inaudible, but their expressions loud. Patel smirked as he sat, fingers drumming once on the polished wood. He glanced at the cameras, then at the chairman's chair, empty for now, and finally at the seat across from his own, still vacant. "She's late," he muttered. The lawyer smiled, but she wasn't. At 8:54 a.m., Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez appeared, not through the main door, but through the side, like a shadow that had always been there. No entourage, no phone in hand. Just a slim leather folder tucked beneath one arm and a stack of annotated documents held tight in the other. No blazer, no jewelry, her hair tied back with surgical neatness. A quiet storm made of posture and presence. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She took her seat in silence, eyes flicking once, just once, toward Patel. He looked away first. The room hadn't noticed her at first. A few aides didn't even realize she had arrived. But slowly the energy shifted. Even the camera operators straightened their backs, suddenly unsure whether their tripods were aimed quite right. Outside, thunder rolled. Not close, but somewhere in the background. Close enough to feel, not close enough to name. At 8:58 a.m., a technician tested the mic feed and whispered, "We're live in 90. Reporters began drifting in behind the velvet rope. Some from the Hill press pool, others from bigger outlets that had only added this hearing to their schedule out of obligation. A young producer from MSNBC leaned over to her colleague and said, "This is going to be nothing." The colleague didn't look up. "Unless she's got something." By 9 a.m. sharp, the chairman entered. Papers shuffled. The gavel dropped once, hollow and sharp. The hearing was officially in session. Patel leaned back in his seat, casual, legs crossed. His attorney placed a neat leather pad in front of him with pre-written responses. "I don't recall. Not to my knowledge. Let me check with counsel." Their script had been practiced, but across from them, AOC sat perfectly still, one finger pressed to the corner of her notes, her thumb tracing the edge of a printed page as if waiting for a cue that hadn't arrived yet. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look ready to attack. She looked like someone who already knew the ending. And as Patel smirked once more, sipping from a paper cup marked with the logo of a Georgetown espresso chain, he had no idea that the moment he lifted it to his lips, his voice had already been recorded saying something he could never unsay. The mic was still on, and something in the air, just under the hum of fluorescent lights and political formality, whispered that today would not end the way anyone expected. Not for him, not for her, not for the country watching. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat motionless. Her eyes swept the room once, but not to meet anyone's gaze, only to observe. The stack of documents in front of her remained untouched, except for one slim folder whose tab had been marked with a strip of red tape. Her fingers hovered just above it, but she didn't open it yet. Her breath was even, her posture sharp, spine straight, shoulders square. The kind of stillness that doesn't call attention to itself, but holds it anyway. At her side, Marisol Torres, her senior aide, leaned in close and whispered under her breath, "If this works, we'll know in 3 minutes." AOC gave the tiniest nod without breaking focus. Her eyes flicked to the time, 9:02 a.m. Across the room, Kash Patel leaned back in his chair like it belonged to him. His right ankle rested over his left knee, one arm draped casually along the top rail, the other holding a to-go cup he hadn't stopped sipping from since he sat down. The branding on the cup, Civitas Roast, was barely visible under the condensation. "I told you," he said quietly to his lawyer. "We'll be out by 10, 11 if she rambles." His attorney chuckled softly. "Let's just stick to the script." "The script," Patel repeated with a grin. "Right. Not that I recall. That wasn't my understanding. Let me check with counsel." He said the phrases like a song he'd grown too used to singing. He was already writing the post-hearing spin in his head, a short, forgettable appearance, maybe 2 minutes of coverage. He could already see himself brushing it off on cable news later. Just more noise from the far left. He didn't notice AOC watching him. She wasn't staring, not exactly, just not looking away. The kind of observation that made you feel exposed without knowing why. At the front of the room, Chairman DuPont settled into his seat, a balding man in his late 60s, known for his dry tone and habit of clearing his throat before making any serious point. He shuffled his notes, adjusted his glasses, and reached for the small wooden gavel. Rap. The sound echoed sharper than expected. "This hearing is now in session," he said, voice calm but clipped. "Today we continue our inquiry into the internal communications and conduct of Mr. Kash Patel. Regarding the classified briefing and surrounding materials from March 2023, Patel smiled, just slightly, and adjusted his mic. The light blinked red. His voice was about to carry farther than he realized. AOC didn't move. Her hand resting on the table made a small motion, one finger tapping the edge of a folder just once. Marisol watched Patel carefully. She wasn't taking notes. She wasn't typing. She was watching his breathing pattern, his jawline, his blinking speed. The room was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that hums just beneath a thunderstorm. Everyone sensed it, even if they didn't know why. One side thought it had the advantage. The other had something else. Chairman DuPont shuffled his stack of papers, glanced toward the committee, and then looked directly at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you may proceed." AOC didn't move right away. She waited a full second longer than expected, letting the silence hold. Then she reached slowly into the folder with the red tab and slid a single page onto the table in front of her. The sound of paper on wood was faint, but crisp enough to be heard by the closest row of staffers. She adjusted the mic with practiced ease. "Mr. Patel," she began, her voice even, almost conversational. "In your last appearance before this committee, under oath, you stated that you had no written communication with Mr. Devlin regarding the March 14th classified briefing. Is that correct?" Kash Patel didn't hesitate. "That's correct," he replied, his tone confident, clipped, prepared. "I believe that's what I stated in my sworn testimony, yes." AOC nodded gently, her eyes dropping to the page. She didn't look at him again. Not yet. She slid the page a half-inch closer to the edge of the table, then turned it slightly toward the chairman's view. Then I'd like to enter into the record a memo, she said, dated March 13th, addressed from your personal email account to Mr. Devlin's private inbox. Subject line, briefing prep, outline and risk mitigation. Several members of the committee looked up. Patel blinked. He didn't move at first, just shifted slightly in his chair, his smirk fading by degrees. AOC continued, the memo includes timestamp details about the March 14th session, including language that matches the summary presented during the classified portion of that meeting. The footer includes your full name and title. And at the bottom, she paused to let the weight land, a digital signature matching 3 others previously verified as belonging to your account. Now Patel leaned forward just slightly, as if distance might help clarify disbelief. That memo doesn't exist, he said, voice flat. That's either misattributed or taken out of context. AOC finally looked up. Her gaze was still, steady, and devoid of the dramatics he might have been expecting. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She simply held his eyes and said, then you won't mind if I read the CCs aloud. Somewhere in the second row, a young aide stopped mid-sip of coffee. 2 reporters exchanged glances. In the back of the room, a C-SPAN producer slowly leaned forward, adjusting the focus manually now. They knew the moment had arrived. AOC flipped the page once and began reading, CC Marcia Lang, Deputy Counsel, Henry Watkins, Scheduling Lead, and 2 redacted staffers identified by their internal usernames. All 4 addresses match congressional directory entries. The transmission was encrypted, routed through a secondary relay, and flagged with an internal memo tag marked, Do Not Archive. Patel didn't answer. His jaw had stiffened. His right hand, still holding the cup, lowered slowly toward the desk, now forgotten. From across the aisle, a junior congressman shifted in his chair, whispering something into the ear of his chief of staff. A few phones glowed brighter as texts were silently sent. Someone, somewhere, had just realized this hearing was no longer background noise. AOC lowered the page again. We can authenticate the message headers, if you'd like. The digital trail is intact. Patel inhaled once, sharply. I'll need to review the document, he said, no longer quite so sure of his footing. AOC gave the faintest nod. You'll have the opportunity, but as of now it's entered into the record, and we'll be asking about others. The room wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The silence that followed was louder than anything Patel had said, because the first cut had landed, and it bled in ink. Chairman Dupont cleared his throat lightly, glanced between the 2 sides of the room, then gave a subtle nod to AOC. She was already turning the next page in her file. There's something else the committee should see, she said, tone still measured. We conducted a metadata analysis on the March 13th memo and matched it to 3 other communications originating from Mr. Patel's personal server. All 4 share identical metadata patterns, same digital certificate, same signature block, same transmission path. She glanced at Patel, then continued. We also retrieved PDF renderings of all 4, generated at the time of creation. The hash values are stable. In other words, these aren't drafts, they're finalized files. Across the table, Kash Patel shifted his weight, squaring his shoulders like a man trying to find new footing in a room that had just begun to tilt. He didn't speak immediately. He opened his mouth as if to respond, then closed it again. The confidence on his face faltered, not broken, but dented. Finally, he leaned toward his mic. There are a lot of tools that can fabricate matching signatures, he said carefully. It's not hard to spoof formatting or headers. Anyone with access to a server image? His attorney touched his wrist. Not enough to stop him, but enough to signal, slow down. Patel gave the briefest glance, then looked back at AOC. I never authorized those documents for distribution, he said, firmer now. They may have been internal notes or prep materials, but they weren't official. AOC let the silence settle for a second, just long enough to let his words echo and fade. Marisol, seated just behind her, leaned forward and placed a glossy printout on the desk. Color ink, full resolution. AOC picked it up slowly, holding it with both hands like she was weighing it. What about this? She asked, turning it slightly toward the committee. It's a screenshot from your Signal conversation with Mr. Devlin. Timestamp, March 14th, 9:12 a.m., 24 hours after the memo in question. Shall I read the message aloud? Patel narrowed his eyes. You're seriously introducing screenshots now? AOC didn't blink. Do you dispute the content? Patel hesitated. I'm saying, I don't recall sending that. Signal messages aren't retained. They can be faked. AOC nodded slowly. Then she read the message aloud. Memo's clean. Buried. Off radar. Just like we said. The words landed like a slow exhale in a room where no one was breathing. Behind Patel, his lawyer's jaw stiffened, and the crease at the corner of his mouth deepened. He said nothing, but his body said plenty. Chairman DuPont looked down at the printout briefly, then back at Patel. Mr. Patel, are you denying that this conversation occurred? Patel didn't answer right away. His fingers tapped the edge of the table in a quiet rhythm. Twice, pause, then again. He looked at the paper, then at the microphone, then finally back at AOC. She hadn't moved, hadn't raised her voice, but somehow it felt like she was the only one still in control of the room. I'd need to review it in context, he said. It's incomplete. You're taking one message and trying to turn it into a narrative. AOC tilted her head slightly. That's fair, she said. So let's keep reading. She turned to the next page, and just like that, the room felt smaller. Patel let out a small laugh. It wasn't loud and it wasn't convincing. It sounded like someone trying to clear a fog of embarrassment with humor, something to shift the energy, to remind the room that he didn't feel threatened. Not yet. These kinds of messages, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the screenshot still on the desk. They're informal. Off the cuff. You're reading them like they're some grand conspiracy. But they're not. They're just shorthand. Staffer shorthand. He glanced sideways at his lawyer, waiting for a reaction. None came. Honestly, he continued, shrugging, if you pull every half-thought-out message from an encrypted chat and treat it like a smoking gun, we're going to be here for a very long time. He smiled, but the corners of his mouth didn't rise with conviction. We weren't planning a coup. We were trying to get through a Thursday. A few chuckles came from the back benches, sympathetic maybe, or just awkward, but they died quickly. AOC didn't smile. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she folded her hands on the table in front of her, tilted her head slightly to one side, and spoke in a voice just loud enough to carry to the furthest corner of the room. We're not talking about lunch, Mr. Patel, she said. This was an intelligence briefing. The words landed like a cold drop of water in the middle of a warm room. Just enough to change the temperature. Just enough to make people notice the chill that had crept in. Patel's jaw stiffened. He didn't respond right away. The silence that followed wasn't accidental. It was strategic, sharpened by the contrast between his attempted humor and her surgical calm. From the press gallery, several reporters looked up from their laptops. One tapped the arm of the person beside her. Another had already opened Twitter, cursor blinking, waiting for the quote. Down near the center aisle, a photographer adjusted his lens and began clicking silently. The shutter whirring through the moment, AOC straightened her notes again and looked toward the chairman. Even members of the committee, many of whom had been checking emails or tapping at their phones earlier, were now leaning forward, elbows on desks, brows furrowed, not in confusion, but in attention. AOC reached for the next document, but paused. She didn't speak yet. She let the weight of what had just been said linger in the air, pressing in on all sides. Patel cleared his throat. Look, he said, lowering his voice a little. If something I wrote came off as flippant, that's on me. But these were private messages, between colleagues. Everyone here knows that kind of language gets used. It doesn't mean anything. Then you won't mind explaining it, AOC replied, her tone softer now, but colder for it. Because from this side of the table, it reads like evasion. It reads like intent. That word, intent, sent a ripple through the room. Patel shifted in his seat. His lawyer leaned back just slightly, no longer touching the table. In the press gallery, tweets were already going out. Breaking AOC corners. Patel on encrypted memo. We're not talking about lunch. Ocasio-Cortez, C-SPAN's broadcast director, watching from a control room 2 floors up, called for a tighter zoom on Patel's face. Because this wasn't banter anymore. This was something else. Patel opened his mouth as if to argue. but nothing came out. AOC hadn't raised her voice once, and yet somehow it was the only voice that mattered. The room held its breath, but Kash Patel couldn't hold his. He leaned forward sharply, hands gripping the edge of the desk, voice no longer controlled but frayed, rising in pitch with each word. "This is political theater," he snapped, the phrase echoing louder than intended through the committee's audio system. "You're twisting private communications and pretending there's something they're not. You're performing for cameras, not looking for truth." Several members flinched, not because of what he said, but how he said it. His attorney froze, lips pressed into a line, hands flat on the table, motionless. You didn't have to be a strategist to know this was the moment it all started slipping. The gallery behind him rustled. Press, aides, even the typically impassive security guards at the doors turned their heads slightly. From the back row, someone muttered, "There it is." But AOC didn't flinch. She didn't shift. She didn't even blink. Instead, with the smooth grace of someone who had not just anticipated the explosion, but timed it, she leaned slightly forward and said, clearly, evenly, "Then thank you for the performance." A beat of silence, and that's when Patel stood, not in ceremony, not in protest, but with the kind of raw, jerking motion of someone trying to escape a room that had suddenly become unbearable. He tore off the mic clipped to his lapel. The wire snapped with a sharp crack. One of the CSPAN producers in the gallery whispered, "Are we still live?" The red light said yes. "Kash," his lawyer hissed under his breath, reaching for his sleeve. But too late. Patel was already backing away from the desk. "This whole thing is a setup," he said, louder now, angrier. "A trap. You people already made up your minds." "We didn't make up anything," AOC replied, her voice still calm, still level. "We just pressed record." The comment didn't even need to be loud. It slipped beneath the drama and landed like a weight. Patel didn't respond. He turned away, storming past the committee rows, his footsteps hard and fast against the polished floor. The doors at the back opened as he pushed them, light flooding in from the hallway. Cameras followed, still rolling. The hearing wasn't over, but he was gone. Back at the witness table, AOC remained seated. She reached into her folder and pulled out a single manila envelope. Thin, unmarked, unopened. She didn't say anything. She didn't even glance at it. She simply laid it flat on the table in front of her and folded her hands gently on top of it. The room was silent again, but not like before. This silence was different, charged, uneasy, as if everyone understood instinctively that whatever was inside that folder wasn't just important. It was what came after the explosion. Behind AOC, Marisol leaned forward and whispered, "Should we hold it?" AOC didn't move. "We wait," she murmured. Across the room, reporters were already typing headlines, phones vibrating, cameras zooming in. The chair Patel had occupied still rocked slightly from his abrupt exit. But the attention, the control, the narrative, it no longer followed him out the door. It had turned, and it was all pointing toward the envelope on AOC's desk. The sound of the doors slamming shut behind Kash Patel hadn't even faded before the hallway outside room 2141 exploded into motion. Reporters who had been half-scrolling on their phones jolted to their feet. Cameramen repositioned. Microphones were thrust into the air. Shoes clicked against the marble as producers barked updates into headsets and assistants weaved through the crowd, already typing. "Did he just walk out?" someone asked. "On live TV?" "Confirmed," another voice shouted. "We've got the feed. Clip's already online." By the time Patel reached the end of the corridor, the hashtag number sign "Patel walks out" was trending. In New York, a major newsroom had already placed the freeze frame of his exit beside a still of AOC sitting at the table. Unmoved, her fingers resting lightly on a manila folder that up to that point no one had asked about. But now everyone wanted to know. Back inside the hearing room, the chaos outside sounded like it belonged to another world. Here the air had settled again, but not into calm, into calculation. Committee members murmured among themselves. Staffers exchanged hurried glances. But at the center of it all, AOC sat completely still. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't check the news alerts already buzzing across the table, where aides' devices lit up like incoming missiles. She simply sat, hands folded over the unopened envelope. Across from her, the chair Patel had occupied still rocked faintly, like it hadn't yet accepted he was gone. Marisol leaned in from her seat behind her voice barely above a breath. "They're going to ask. Everyone's going to want to know what's inside." AOC didn't look at her. Her gaze was fixed on the envelope. "Let them wonder," she said quietly. There was a pause, then just loud enough to hear, "If he doesn't come back, we open it." Marisol nodded once. No debate, no hesitation. She knew exactly what that meant, and what it would cost. Behind them, the hearing chamber buzzed with a different kind of tension now. Not the passive air of political routine, but something electric, intentional, like a stage where the audience knows the second act will be more brutal than the first. Chairman Dupont conferred with staff at the dais, his brow furrowed, occasionally glancing toward the empty witness table as though expecting Patel to reappear at any moment, muttering a half apology and reclaiming his seat. But he didn't. In the press gallery, one journalist turned to another and whispered, "She's sitting on something. You feel it?" The other nodded. Whatever's in that folder, he knew about it. That's why he ran. Outside, the building's Wi-Fi strained under the weight of uploads. Clips of Patel's outburst were already being remixed, subtitled, slowed down for dramatic effect. Screenshots of AOC's steady stare circulated with captions like, "She knew," and "the folder." Inside, the folder remained untouched. Marisol checked her watch. He's got 5 minutes before this becomes history. AOC finally moved, but only to draw a slow breath. She wasn't anxious. She wasn't distracted. She was patient, dangerously patient. The kind of patience that unnerves people more than shouting ever could. The silence that filled the chamber wasn't passive. It was loaded. It was waiting. And so was she. At precisely 9:51 a.m., Chairman Dupont tapped his gavel twice, cutting through the ambient murmur that had settled over the room like fog. The sound echoed, not loud but sharp, final. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Chairs shifted, eyes turned forward. "We will now reconvene," he announced, voice taut, as if trying to pull the room back into order. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you may proceed." AOC didn't stand. She didn't need to. Instead, she slid the manila envelope from beneath her hand with the same quiet confidence as someone lighting a fuse. "I'd like to enter a new document into the record," she said. "This material was reviewed by our legal staff during the recess and verified by 2 independent cybersecurity analysts. It was sourced from Mr. Patel's personal email server and recovered through an encrypted archive dated March the 16th. She opened the envelope and drew out a single-page document, printed in bold type with a subject line that seemed to land in the room before she even read it aloud. "Deconfliction Strategy, FOIA Avoidance Protocol." The words hung in the air like smoke. Dry, official, dangerous. She continued, now reading from the page. "This internal memo outlines recommended strategies for limiting discoverability of sensitive communications related to intelligence operations. Suggested methods include, quote, exclusive use of encrypted messaging platforms for all logistical discussions. Reliance on non-government devices where applicable, and, quote, calendar evasion practices, avoiding formal entries when informal meetings can be coordinated verbally or off-site." She paused and looked around the room. Not dramatically, but deliberately. Even the chairman leaned forward, mouth slightly open. "These are not allegations," AOC added, turning the document to show the page to the gallery camera. "This is Mr. Patel's own language, written 2 days after he testified under oath that no such practices were ever implemented." A subtle current shifted through the room. It was in the way committee members exchanged glances, in the way reporters rechecked their recordings, in the way a single intern in the back row mouthed the words "calendar evasion" to herself like she couldn't believe it was real. The room no longer belonged to Kash Patel. It belonged to the paper in AOC's hand. Marisol, seated behind her, tapped a small touchscreen monitor, projecting the document onto the digital display behind the witness table. The screen flickered once, then glowed to life with Patel's header, email timestamp, and the full text beneath the subject line. It was clinical, efficient, undeniable. This memo, AOC said, was not circulated through official channels. It was stored in a secured, private folder labeled Red Zone Internal Only. The recipient list was limited to 4 individuals, all of whom have, to date, denied knowledge of such a plan. A beat passed, 2 beats, and then she said it. So we have 2 possibilities. Either Mr. Patel lied under oath, or he orchestrated a clandestine communication strategy to keep sensitive operations off the record and outside legal oversight. A sharp inhale somewhere in the second row broke the quiet like a snapped wire. The tension in the room had condensed into something palpable, visible even. The press gallery lit up again, fingers flying over keyboards. Phones buzzed. The live broadcast feed flashed a red banner. AOC reveals deconfliction memo from Patel's private server. Chairman DuPont didn't speak. No one did. AOC lowered the document. We're not asking for speculation, she said quietly. We're asking for accountability. And for the first time since the hearing began, even the silence felt like it had taken her side. At 10:08 a.m., the door at the side of the hearing room creaked open, and Kash Patel walked back in. But he wasn't the same man who had stormed out 15 minutes earlier. The fire was gone. No swagger, no smirk, no whispered jokes to his lawyer. Just a tight jaw, downcast eyes, and the defeated silence of someone who had been told behind closed doors that the narrative had slipped from his hands and into history. He moved slowly, deliberately, returning to the witness chair without a glance toward the committee or the cameras. His lawyer followed 2 steps behind, face unreadable. Neither of them spoke. The room, oddly enough, respected the silence. AOC didn't look at him, not right away. She was still reviewing the memo, her fingers traced under one line, as if confirming that it was still there, that it hadn't changed in his absence. Chairman DuPont broke the pause. Mr. Patel, he said, voice firm but neutral, during your absence, Representative Ocasio-Cortez introduced a document into the record. You may respond. Patel leaned toward the microphone, the motion slower now. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before. I'd like to clarify a few things, he said. Some of the language in that memo was never meant to be taken literally. AOC looked up. Her eyes met his for a long second. So you're saying it was metaphor? Patel hesitated. I'm saying, in my line of work, people often use informal phrasing to outline theoretical risk management strategies. That doesn't mean those strategies were implemented. You said, AOC replied without raising her voice, in sworn testimony that nothing was written. This, she tapped the memo, is written extensively. A wave of stillness passed through the committee, the kind that doesn't move a muscle but changes posture anyway. Even those who had given Patel the benefit of the doubt were now staring at the screen behind him, where the words calendar evasion remained glowing, stark, and irrefutable. There were no coughs, no shifting chairs, no tapping pens, only the tension of truth forcing everyone upright. In the press gallery, the real-time headlines changed mid-sentence. CNN broke away from live coverage of a different event to bring in legal analysts. MSNBC rolled a chyron that read, Patel clarifies memo he said didn't exist. Even on Fox News, the tone was shifting. Slowly, cautiously. A commentator frowned at the camera and admitted, the language in this memo doesn't look good. Back inside the room, Patel tried again. You're interpreting that document as a finalized protocol, but internal drafts often explore ideas that aren't enacted. AOC's tone didn't change, but her focus sharpened. Then perhaps you can provide us with the version that was enacted, with timestamps. With oversight, Patel didn't answer. His attorney placed a single hand flat on the table, but didn't speak. AOC leaned back slightly, her gaze still on him. Because what this shows, what everyone in this room now sees, is that when you said nothing was written, you didn't just mislead us, you misled yourself into thinking no one would ever find it. And that was when the room turned, not with shouts, not with gasps, but with quiet understanding that the man who once controlled the narrative was now trapped inside it. AOC didn't reach for another document this time. Instead, she tapped a discrete control panel built into the desk before her. A second later, the main screen behind the witness table blinked, flickered to black, then displayed a timestamp. April 2nd, 2023, internal training session. She looked up, not at the screen, not at the chairman, but directly at Patel. "We've reviewed communication," she said, "but we also received something else. During the recess, this committee obtained an audio file, an internal training session hosted over Zoom last April. Mr. Patel, in that session, you addressed a small group of staffers regarding communication protocols inside classified operations." Patel didn't move. AOC continued, her voice now even quieter, but somehow more commanding for it. "The recording is 45 seconds long. We've cued the exact segment that concerns this committee." The screen pulsed once. The room lights dimmed slightly, and then, from the ceiling speakers, Kash Patel's own voice filled the room. It wasn't the strained, defensive tone he had used moments ago. It was casual, confident, relaxed in the way people sound when they don't think they're being watched. "Keep comms clean. If you've got anything that even looks like it crosses a line, send it through Signal. Never email. And if anyone asks later, deny knowledge, unless you're backed into a corner." The words were crisp, the audio sharp. There was no static, no ambiguity, just truth, amplified. There was a moment, only a second, but the entire room responded at once. A soft, collective gasp moved through the chamber like a ripple. Even Chairman DuPont blinked rapidly, shifting forward in his seat as if trying to hear it again to make sure he had understood correctly. At the witness table, Patel didn't blink, but he did swallow. Not loudly, not dramatically, but visibly. AOC let the silence sit for 2 beats, then spoke. Quiet, direct. "Mr. Patel," she said, "is that your voice?" Patel's eyes darted toward his lawyer, who didn't return the look. His jaw tightened. The lights felt harsher now, as if the overhead fluorescence had been turned up by some invisible hand. A pause. Then barely above a whisper, "Yes." He didn't elaborate, didn't try to frame it, spin it, deflect it. He couldn't. AOC's tone didn't change, but her words landed like stone. "And do you retract any part of that statement?" Patel's throat worked once, but he said nothing. Chairman DuPont cleared his throat. "Mr. Patel, the committee requires a verbal response." A long breath. Then, "No, I do not." The confirmation echoed, not in volume, but in finality. It was the sound of a narrative collapsing under its own weight. In the press gallery, every screen glowed. Headlines began updating mid-sentence. Producers scrambled to swap segments. Pundits abandoned pre-written takes. Across the country, cable news banners broke in. "Patel admits to audio. Never email, deny later." Back at the table, AOC didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. She simply said, "Let the record show that these were not allegations. These were instructions." Patel said nothing. He didn't have to. The room had heard him already, in his own voice. And for the first time in the hearing, no one could say they didn't understand what was at stake. The silence that followed Patel's admission was not passive. It was purposeful. It hummed beneath the fluorescent lights, charged with something that had shifted permanently. It was no longer about one message, one memo, or even one lie. The room understood that now. Something deeper had been touched, something that couldn't be explained away by nerves or a bad morning. Patel sat with both hands clasped tightly in front of him, his knuckles whitening. His lawyer, still stoic, said nothing. The weight of the confession hung between them like a second microphone no one dared touch. AOC didn't raise her voice. She didn't change her cadence. She simply asked the question that had already formed in every mind in the room. "Mr. Patel," she said, her tone clinical but edged, "you mentioned these were not offhand remarks, that they were part of a broader strategy. Who developed that playbook?" Patel didn't respond immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on the grain of the wood beneath his hands. He looked not like a man resisting the question, but like one debating how much he was willing to lose with the answer. After a moment, his voice came low. "It was built internally, over time. Not a single document, more like shared guidance, institutional muscle memory. AOC leaned forward just slightly. And who else was involved in building that guidance? Patel exhaled slowly through his nose. Policy team, senior staff, some communications people. It wasn't an official task force. It was informal. Her voice remained steady. How many? His answer came out like a sigh escaping through locked teeth. 5, maybe 6. Names? He looked up for the first time, and for just a moment, the old defiance flickered in his eyes. But it didn't stay. I'm not going to name them here, he said. Not in this setting. You're under oath, AOC reminded him. I know, he replied, and I'm telling you, I won't say more here. That single sentence shifted everything. The air in the room went from scandal to legal crisis. The committee members knew it. The attorneys present knew it. Even the press, whose instinct had been to chase headlines, now realized they were looking at the early tremors of something bigger, deeper, dangerous. Chairman DuPont leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Mr. Patel, by withholding names, you place yourself in a precarious legal position. This committee has the authority to subpoena any parties relevant to the investigation. Patel's mouth was a hard line. Then subpoena them. The sentence echoed, not with arrogance, but inevitability. He wasn't bluffing anymore. He was shielding something. Someone. AOC didn't flinch. She sat back slowly, her pen tapping once on the desk in front of her. Just so we're clear, she said, you're confirming that at least 5 people, including yourself, shared in the deliberate use of off-channel communication methods designed to avoid oversight? He nodded once. Yes. From the press gallery came a low murmur, almost involuntary. In homes and offices across the country, on live streams and radio rebroadcasts, the moment was being replayed and reinterpreted in real time. What had begun as a confrontation had now opened a window into the operating system of power itself. Patel looked tired now, not frustrated, not angry, just exposed. And the room, once focused on one man's unraveling, was now staring into the widening cracks of something far more calculated than anyone had dared assume. The confession didn't spread. It detonated. By the time Patel leaned back from the microphone and whispered the word yes, a producer at MSNBC had already clipped the exchange and uploaded it to the network's rapid response feed. Within 4 minutes, the clip appeared on Twitter with a blunt caption. He admitted it. 45 seconds later, the same footage was reposted by a high school civics teacher in Minnesota with the tag number "Power Hears Itself." By the 10-minute mark, it had crossed 2.3 million views. No dramatic music, no flashing banners, just the raw C-SPAN feed. Patel's voice clear, his posture slumped, the glowing text on the display behind him still reading, "Never email. Deny later." And across the country, everything paused. At a Starbucks in Atlanta, a barista stopped mid-pour, eyes locked on the tablet behind the register, streaming the hearing. At a public library in Ohio, a group of college students gathered around a single laptop, headphones split between them, watching Patel's words echo again. In a living room in Flagstaff, Arizona, a grandmother set down her crossword puzzle and stared at the television with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Not everyone understood the legal language. Not everyone could explain metadata or FOIA protocol. But they didn't need to. They understood tone. They understood body language. They understood what it looked like when a man ran out of lies in front of a microphone. And above all, they understood AOC's silence. Because while Patel talked, squirmed, confessed, she said nothing. No follow-up, no comment, no victory line. She simply sat there, motionless, her eyes fixed not on the cameras, not on the crowd, but on Patel. Like a physician watching a patient finally admit what they'd tried to hide for months. Like someone who had known all along that this moment would come. And it was that image, her stillness, that broke through the noise. Newsrooms across the spectrum ran the clip on loop. CNN aired it 5 times in a single hour. Fox News, usually quick to pivot, hesitated, offering no commentary for a full 2 minutes after playing the footage. One anchor even muttered off mic, "That's Not great. No one needed talking heads to explain what they saw. They felt it. It wasn't just about the memo anymore. It was about trust, power, the terrifying simplicity of a system quietly engineered to hide itself, until someone patient enough, prepared enough, and calm enough laid it bare. AOC didn't raise her voice. She didn't claim a win. She just waited. And in the space of that waiting, the country heard what it had been waiting for. Not noise, not outrage. Just one man finally telling the truth. And the mic, still on, did the rest. Long before the microphones lit red and Kash Patel leaned into a spiral of self-inflicted collapse, someone else had already started unraveling the thread. She wasn't in the hearing room. She didn't carry a title anyone outside the Hill would recognize. She didn't brief reporters or appear in polished headshots. But Melinda Torres, 28 years old with a badge that read Legislative Technical Assistant, House Intelligence Subcommittee, had been listening. Not to the news, not to public hearings, to everything else. She worked 2 floors below the main offices in a cramped corner of the subcommittee's archive wing, a windowless stretch of hall lit by humming fluorescents and lined with gray fireproof cabinets. It was the kind of place where conversations were muffled and work was measured in metadata. Her job was routine and forgettable by design. Cross-reference classified meeting transcripts, flag duplicate entries, maintain version control over documents no one wanted to admit still existed. Most aides rotated through that office for 3 months and never returned. Melinda had stayed for almost a year. That morning, 3 weeks before the Patel hearing was even on the schedule, she was refiling old security brief logs when she heard 2 senior staffers talking in the next aisle. One chuckling, the other half whispering through the kind of casual arrogance that comes when you think the only people nearby aren't paying attention. They weren't talking about legislation. They were joking about ghost drives. That's what one of them called it. Pocket-size security blankets, he said. You know, the ones no one ever inventories. The other one had laughed harder than necessary. Yeah, W staff line's still good for that. Just don't say that name out loud. They walked off before she could hear the rest. Most people would have ignored it. Melinda didn't. She didn't laugh, and she didn't forget. Instead, she wrote down those exact words in the margin of a notepad tucked into her planner. Not digitally, by hand. Then over the next 4 days, during late nights and coffee breaks, she began scanning internal logs for fragments, metadata, version trails, subfolder designations that didn't line up with official documentation protocols. She wasn't a hacker. She didn't break firewalls or breach secure servers. She just knew what to look for. Anomalies that didn't make sense in systems that were designed to always make sense. 4 days later, she found the first thread. A cluster of encrypted PDFs tagged under an administrative path that hadn't been active since 2021. Buried under technical memos, mislabeled as procedural drafts. One of them bore the exact title she remembered from the joke, Deconfliction Strategy, FOIA Avoidance Protocol. She didn't bring it to her supervisor. She didn't tell anyone. She kept going. She traced back transmission headers. She found matching entries in a server that had been archived months before its last recorded use. She found 3 messages routed through non-government email addresses, all linked to a device fingerprint that eventually led her to a name she recognized, Kash Patel. And when she had enough, when she was sure it was real, she printed everything. Not a hard drive, not a flash stick, just ink and paper. Then she folded it into a plain manila envelope, took a day off, and walked into Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's district office in New York. She didn't make an appointment. She didn't ask for a meeting. She handed the envelope to a young man behind a security desk and said quietly, "Please make sure she gets this. No one else." And then she left. It was a Wednesday when Melinda Torres called in a personal day. She didn't tell anyone why, just logged the hours, forwarded her pending tasks, and packed a slim manila envelope into the inside pocket of her denim jacket. No laptop, no badge, no digital trail. She booked a one-way flight the night before, commercial, economy, no checked bags, and landed in Dallas just after 10 a.m. She'd never been to Texas. She didn't come to sightsee. She took a rideshare to a small, unassuming brick building tucked between a tax office and a bilingual dentist's clinic. There was no flag out front, no gold-lettered sign, just a frosted glass panel reading, Office of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Texas District Liaison. Inside it was quiet. A single young man manned the reception desk, wearing a navy polo with the district seal embroidered over the heart. He glanced up when she entered, half curious, half expecting to hand her a brochure and send her on her way. But Melinda didn't ask for literature. She stepped forward, reached into her jacket, and placed the envelope on the desk, flat, smooth, without hesitation. "Can I help you?" the aide asked. Her voice was calm but firmer than she expected. "Yes," she said. "You can make sure this gets to her. Directly. No one else." He blinked. "Are you with—" "No," she interrupted gently. "I'm not with anyone." She didn't give a name, didn't offer credentials. She didn't need to. He reached for the envelope. She didn't let go immediately. "It's important," she said softer now. "But more than that, it's clean. I need you to understand that. This hasn't touched anyone's inbox. No server, no trace." The aide's eyebrows knit together, instinctively alert. He nodded slowly. "I'll walk it upstairs myself." That was enough. She released the envelope, gave the faintest nod, then turned and walked back through the glass doors. She didn't wait to be called. She didn't look back. It would take 3 days before the envelope reached AOC's hands, passed up through layers of administrative triage. At first, it looked like standard casework. No letter, no return address. But when one of AOC's legal researchers opened it and saw the subject line, Deconfliction Strategy, FOIA Avoidance Protocol, she froze, flipped the page, found server logs, matching headers, device fingerprints, texts, and then a separate sheet stapled alone. A reference to a Zoom meeting, time-stamped and transcribed. No audio included, just a note in the margin, check internal archive, April 2nd. That's when the envelope was hand-carried upstairs. AOC didn't read it all at once. She spread it across her desk like puzzle pieces. Not rushed, not reactionary, just methodical. When she got to the signature line, Kash Patel, she didn't raise her eyebrows. She just said one word. "Verified?" Marisol nodded. "We've already matched it with 3 confirmed emails. It's real." AOC didn't speak for a full minute. Then quietly, "And someone gave it to us without asking for credit." Marisol hesitated. "Do we want to find out who?" "No," AOC replied. "Not yet." She reached for a pen, circled the subject line of the memo, and underlined one word in red. Avoidance. Then she closed the folder and said, "Get ready." Because the storm hadn't started on camera. It had started here, in a quiet room, with a quiet envelope, from someone who never wanted to be known. The documents from the envelope didn't go straight to headlines. They went into a silent room with locked doors and 3 members of AOC's internal legal team, each cleared for classified review, each trained to see what others missed. Every page was scanned, photographed, but never uploaded. Every staple was removed with tweezers. Every margin was studied. They didn't just look at content, they looked at paper stock, ink age, and toner alignment. It didn't take long. The metadata on the PDFs matched known government file signatures from 2022 and 2023, verified by 2 independent timestamps from previously archived legislative memos. Font usage was consistent with DHS protocols. Transmission headers on the internal routing logs pointed to an IP cluster in the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Nothing was fake. Nothing was altered. It was untouched. And then came the final message. A separate laptop, used only for isolated decryption, lit up at 3:12 p.m. A single email had arrived via a blind encrypted tunnel, routed through 3 proxy servers in Europe and 1 in Nairobi. There was no name, no IP bounce back, no embedded code, just a subject line. "You've already seen the transcript. Now hear it." Attached was an audio file, 45 seconds, WAV format, lossless compression, no explanation, no follow-up. Marisol was the first to listen. She clicked play, expecting static, maybe a prank, maybe a mistake. Instead, the voice came through clear and familiar. Keep comms clean. If you've got anything that even looks like it crosses a line, send it through Signal. Never email. And if anyone asks later, deny knowledge, unless you're backed into a corner. The exact same line that had appeared in the transcript found in the envelope, but now with tone, with cadence, with a voice that needed no introduction. It was Kash Patel. The room was silent except for the low hum of the desktop fan. One of the legal analysts, a Harvard-trained compliance specialist who'd previously vetted Pentagon leak cases, leaned back and rubbed his temple. "This is beyond whistleblowing," he said quietly. "This is torching the system from the inside." AOC didn't speak at first. She replayed the audio just once, then turned toward Marisol. "Whoever sent this," she said, "they're not asking us to find the truth." Marisol frowned. "Then what are they doing?" AOC's eyes stayed locked on the screen. "They're daring us to say it out loud." Down the hall, the secure printer began humming again, printing out chain of custody forms, internal witness protection referrals, and a quiet draft of procedural rules for the upcoming hearing. Everything was ready, and yet none of it felt loud, because what had arrived wasn't just evidence, it was a fuse, and someone, somewhere, had just handed them a lit match. It was late, after hours long after the last staffer had left the building, when the second message arrived. No return address, no preamble, just 7 words in plain text, blinking coldly on a secure terminal used only for internal routing in vetted comms. "Check your server logs. You missed something." At first, AOC's team thought it was a duplicate tip, a rehash, but one of the younger digital analysts, a 24-year-old hire fresh from Berkeley, zoomed in on the metadata. The ping wasn't from the US this time. It came from a relay point that bounced twice through Buenos Aires, then Iceland, then landed on a sandbox terminal routed to the intelligence subcommittee. The analyst didn't hesitate. He opened the query interface and manually sifted through logs from mid-March, as hinted. He paused at March 17th. There it was, buried inside a document retrieval request, a shadow thread, unlabeled, appended to a non-indexed system call, invisible to most audit tools unless you knew where to look. It referenced one line, W staff line, confirmation code X9. The term W staff line hadn't appeared in any official document, but AOC knew the phrase. It had surfaced weeks earlier, when Melinda Torres overheard it in the stacks, dismissed as an inside joke, a casual whisper. Only now it wasn't casual. AOC leaned over the analyst's shoulder. "Can you trace it?" He nodded, already launching the digital forensics tools. "It's a ghost input," he said. "Spoofed origin, likely bounced through a virtual machine." A few clicks, a few seconds, then pause. "Wait, it shouldn't have metadata." "What do you mean?" AOC asked, suddenly alert. The analyst leaned forward, heart rate audibly picking up. "Someone screwed up. There's a timestamp embedded on the wrong layer. It's hidden, but not encrypted." He opened a backdoor extraction panel, ran a filter. The trace led back to a known mobile identifier. Kash Patel's government-issued phone. And it wasn't a forward. It wasn't something copied and passed along. It was sent from his device, spoofed, rerouted, anonymized, but originating from a place no one could explain away. AOC's voice was calm, but sharp as steel. What was the message he tried to hide? The analyst opened the payload. Inside, one text thread, 9 messages, sent between Patel and a contact labeled only as W liaison. No names, but the content was unmistakable. Patel, make sure no copies survive past Monday. W liaison, already deleted from server. Paper copies shredded. Patel, good. If this leaks, we're all done. W liaison, they don't even know the thread exists. All buried. Patel, then it never happened. AOC stared at the screen. There was no anger on her face, only a stillness, a cold, methodical clarity that her staff had come to recognize. "Print it, twice," she said. "One for the record, one sealed." The analyst hesitated. "And the tipper?" AOC looked down at the blinking cursor on the original email. "No reply," she said. "They didn't ask to be found." She stood crossing to the window of the office, looking out at the Capitol dome glittering in the cool spring air. This wasn't just digital arrogance. It was institutional muscle memory, the belief that if something wasn't seen, it never existed. But now it did. And this time, it would be heard, not whispered. The hearing resumed under brighter lights. More press had arrived since morning. The room was now standing room only. 3 cameras had to be repositioned to capture both angles. One on the witness table, one locked onto AOC, and one on the gallery, where even the most jaded reporters were leaning forward now, not blinking. Patel sat still, no longer slouched. His coffee had long gone cold. His second lawyer, a DC fixer more used to hush-hush depositions than live testimony, had moved closer to him, whispering rapidly. But Patel waved him off. Across from him, AOC didn't shuffle papers or perform for the cameras. She didn't raise her voice. She simply turned a single page over in her binder, paused and read, clearly calmly. If she asks, deny, she won't follow up. K. Patel, March 17th, 2:48 p.m. Patel blinked once, no expression. I don't recall that message, he said, adjusting his mic. AOC didn't even lift her eyes. It was traced directly to your government device, routed through a spoof network, but the embedded metadata was left intact. Your system time, unique device ID, and the fingerprint match to your archived calendar. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. His lawyer leaned in again, more urgently now, but Patel shook his head. That could have been spoofed, he said finally, weaker this time. You can fake those things. People do it all the time. AOC's aide, Marisol, stepped forward and handed her a single-page document. She slid it across the table slowly. This is a sworn affidavit from our digital forensics team, AOC said, her voice measured but sharp. It outlines the retrieval chain, the forensic validation, and the lock server replication that confirms the message came from your phone. Patel picked up the document, held it in one hand for a moment, and then set it down, without reading a word. The silence was brutal. Chairman DuPont didn't speak. Neither did the ranking members. Everyone was waiting. AOC leaned forward, not aggressive, just closer. You didn't expect anyone to follow up, she said softly. You thought silence was enough. You counted on it. Patel looked at her, and something in his face changed. Not rage, not arrogance. Something smaller, a slight twitch at the jawline, a breath held too long, shoulders that had once carried swagger now rounded, heavy. He looked down. I need, he said, voice thin, then louder, broken. I need another lawyer. There was no applause, no outburst, just the sound of 2 attorneys exchanging glances, one reaching for his briefcase, the other gently motioning for a pause in proceedings. But AOC didn't move. She looked at Patel for a long, quiet moment, and then finally spoke, barely above a whisper. You made a bet on silence, she said. You lost. The room didn't erupt because it didn't need to. By then, the whole country was already watching. The moment Patel requested new counsel, a procedural domino toppled. Chairman DuPont, visibly rattled, though trying not to show it, conferred with his aides. Within 5 minutes, a motion was filed to temporarily suspend testimony pending further legal advisement. But by then, it was too late to contain anything. The Department of Justice had already reached out to the committee's legal liaison. A quiet phone call, no formal announcement yet, just a question. Can we see the chain of custody on the metadata files? The tone was not casual. It never is, when the stakes involve perjury, obstruction, and the shredding of federal records. Outside the Rayburn building, the air had changed. Dozens of protesters had gathered, some holding signs that said, "No more secrets," others with simply one word, "Listen." Vans from 4 major news networks clogged the curb. Mobile towers lifted skyward like chrome trees, beaming signal across the country. On television, legal experts flooded the airwaves. Former prosecutors, intelligence veterans. Every sentence began with variations of, "If this is authenticated," followed by quiet astonishment when anchors confirmed that it already had been. This isn't just a hearing anymore, said one analyst on MSNBC. This is a legal crisis unfolding in real time. replied another on CNN. Fox stayed cautious, silent for the moment. They knew the winds were shifting. Inside, the hearing room remained frozen in its last image. Patel hunched over, his lawyer whispering furiously, and AOC still sitting tall, arms folded, her binder closed. Chairman Dupont struck his gavel. This committee is in recess, pending legal consultation and formal statement from the Department of Justice. No one moved. The camera zoomed in on AOC. She leaned into the mic, her voice calm, unshaken. This is not the end of the matter. We're not done. Not by a long shot. That sentence cut through the noise like a clean blade. It was clipped and final, not for effect, but for truth. A murmur went through the gallery. Reporters filed out, thumbs racing across glass screens, feeds exploding with the latest headline. AOC promises more. We're not done. Backstage, Marisol met AOC in the hallway. DOJ? She asked. AOC nodded. They're circling. What do we do now? She looked out toward the Capitol through the small rectangular window at the end of the corridor. The sky over D.C. was shifting again, from steel gray to something darker. AOC's voice was steady. Now we widen the search. Because the machine had cracked, not shattered, not yet. But the gears were slipping. The polish was gone. And for the first time, the public wasn't just watching, they were listening. And somewhere, someone else was preparing to speak. 3 days after the hearing was suspended, the media storm had reached a saturation point. There were timelines on morning shows, audio forensic breakdowns on podcasts, and even a late-night host opening with, "Turns out, when you text, deny everything, someone might be recording." But AOC didn't show up for the interviews. Not CNN, not Rachel Maddow, not even NPR, which had sent a handwritten letter. She wasn't hiding. She was simply done performing. Behind the Capitol's marble columns, she returned to the quieter rooms. Subcommittee reviews, office check-ins, handwritten notes to families in her district. The staff offered to reschedule her appearances. She waved them off. "Let the story breathe," she said. "Let them decide what mattered." Outside, the narrative was being carved by others. Some called her relentless, others dangerous. A few conservative pundits accused her of political ambition wrapped in theater. But the louder accusation faded fast, because facts don't care for spin, and the timeline now lived on public record. The memo, the signal screenshot, the audio, the traced message from Patel's phone, the phrase, "Horace, she won't follow up." And yet, she did. One morning, while exiting a Veterans Resource Center in Queens, a reporter sprinted down the steps with a microphone and caught her mid-stride. "Congresswoman, just a quick quote. What's your takeaway now that DOJ's involved?" AOC paused, one foot already stepping into the SUV. She turned back, offered a brief smile, tired but unshaken. "I'm just glad," she said, "that the truth got the microphone." And that was it. Not "I told you so," not "we nailed him," not "justice is coming." Just the simple satisfaction that truth, not noise, had broken through. Behind her, Marisol climbed into the car silently, carrying a new stack of sealed folders. One of them was labeled Legacy Review, Archival Redaction Notes. The SUV pulled away, blending into the slow churn of DC traffic. Back in the Capitol, Chairman Dupont had already received 2 formal letters from the DOJ requesting cooperation. One included a sealed subpoena list. Another, an invitation for the Intelligence Subcommittee to participate in a closed-session review of internal chain memos relating to data suppression. None of it would be televised. None of it would go viral. But all of it mattered. Inside AOC's office, a single post-it note stayed pinned above her desk. Written in thick black ink, "We don't need to speak over them. We need to speak through." A phrase she once heard from a janitor outside a housing town hall in the Bronx. It stayed with her, through campaigns, through firestorms, through moments like this. Because in the end, there were no fireworks, no banners, just the sound of something quieter and far more dangerous catching on. It began with a handwritten letter, no return address, no email, just a tremble in the ink. It arrived at the office of Representative Callahan in Sacramento, wrapped in an old envelope with a faded love stamp. Inside was a short note written in cursive, barely legible, but unmistakably steady. If she can ask the hard questions, then so can you. I'm 81. Don't let this slip away. The letter was read aloud at a morning staff briefing. Callahan, normally cautious in middle lane, paused mid-sip of his coffee and asked quietly, "Is she watching the hearings?" Aide. Every session. She's the one who flagged the first inconsistency in the Patel transcript. The congressman didn't speak again for a minute. Elsewhere in Austin, Texas, it started differently. Louder, faster. A student at UT Law, fired up by the hearings, drafted a petition calling for the establishment of a national transparency and governance framework, a kind of reverse FOIA that forces disclosure of digital communication trails among high-ranking advisors. It began with 38 signatures. By nightfall, it had over 76,000. They marched to the Capitol Annex building in Austin, holding cardboard signs that said, "The truth deserves Wi-Fi. Email is forever. Make it traceable." Across the country, ripple after ripple moved quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, through conversations that had grown dull and cynical over the years. In diners in Michigan, people brought up the memo not with rage but with clarity. In senior centers in Georgia, groups met weekly not to complain about cable news, but to learn how metadata worked. One woman in Tulsa baked a cake that said she followed up in frosting and brought it to her book club. They weren't fans. They weren't partisans. They were citizens who had seen a line crossed, and someone walked toward it instead of around it. Even the news anchors, who normally live for the theater, sounded different this time. On MSNBC, it wasn't just a scandal, it was a systems check, and we failed. On Fox, if even a quarter of this holds up, someone needs to lose their clearance. On NPR, this wasn't noise, this was signal. AOC didn't reach for another document this time. Instead, she tapped a discrete control panel built into the desk before her. A second later, the main screen behind the witness table blinked, flickered to black, then displayed a timestamp. April 2nd, 2023, internal training session. She looked up, not at the screen, not at the chairman, but directly at Patel. "We've reviewed communication," she said, "but we also received something else. During the recess, this committee obtained an audio file, an internal training session hosted over Zoom last April. Mr. Patel, in that session, you addressed a small group of staffers regarding communication protocols inside classified operations." Patel didn't move. AOC continued, her voice now even quieter, but somehow more commanding for it. "The recording is 45 seconds long. We've cued the exact segment that concerns this committee." The screen pulsed once. The room lights dimmed slightly, and then, from the ceiling speakers, Kash Patel's own voice filled the room. It wasn't the strained, defensive tone he had used moments ago. It was casual, confident, relaxed in the way people sound when they don't think they're being watched. "Keep comms clean. If you've got anything that even looks like it crosses a line, send it through Signal. Never email. And if anyone asks later, deny knowledge, unless you're backed into a corner." The words were crisp, the audio sharp. There was no static, no ambiguity, just truth, amplified. There was a moment, only a second, but the entire room responded at once. A soft, collective gasp moved through the chamber like a ripple. Even Chairman DuPont blinked rapidly, shifting forward in his seat as if trying to hear it again to make sure he had understood correctly. At the witness table, Patel didn't blink, but he did swallow. Not loudly, not dramatically, but visibly. AOC let the silence sit for 2 beats, then spoke. Quiet, direct. "Mr. Patel," she said, "is that your voice?" Patel's eyes darted toward his lawyer, who didn't return the look. His jaw tightened. The lights felt harsher now, as if the overhead fluorescence had been turned up by some invisible hand. A pause. Then barely above a whisper, "Yes." He didn't elaborate, didn't try to frame it, spin it, deflect it. He couldn't. AOC's tone didn't change, but her words landed like stone. "And do you retract any part of that statement?" Patel's throat worked once, but he said nothing. Chairman DuPont cleared his throat. Mr. Patel, the committee requires a verbal response, a long breath. Then, no, I do not. The confirmation echoed, not in volume, but in finality. It was the sound of a narrative collapsing under its own weight. In the press gallery, every screen glowed. Headlines began updating mid-sentence. Producers scrambled to swap segments. Pundits abandoned pre-written takes. Across the country, cable news banners broke in. Patel admits to audio. Never email, deny later. Back at the table, AOC didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. She simply said, "Let the record show that these were not allegations. These were instructions." Patel said nothing. He didn't have to. The room had heard him already, in his own voice. And for the first time in the hearing, no one could say they didn't understand what was at stake. The silence that followed Patel's admission was not passive. It was purposeful. It hummed beneath the fluorescent lights, charged with something that had shifted permanently. It was no longer about one message, one memo, or even one lie. The room understood that now. Something deeper had been touched, something that couldn't be explained away by nerves or a bad morning. Patel sat with both hands clasped tightly in front of him, his knuckles whitening. His lawyer, still stoic, said nothing. The weight of the confession hung between them like a second microphone no one dared touch. AOC didn't raise her voice. She didn't change her cadence. She simply asked the question that had already formed in every mind in the room. "Mr. Patel," she said, her tone clinical but edged, "you mentioned these were not offhand remarks, that they were part of a broader strategy. Who developed that playbook?" Patel didn't respond immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on the grain of the wood beneath his hands. He looked not like a man resisting the question, but like one debating how much he was willing to lose with the answer. After a moment, his voice came low. "It was built internally, over time. Not a single document. More like shared guidance, institutional muscle memory." AOC leaned forward, just slightly. "And who else was involved in building that guidance?" Patel exhaled slowly through his nose. "Policy team, senior staff, some communications people. It wasn't an official task force. It was informal."